will give the first presentation of this session on detecting hot topic in the news. If you wish to ask questions, you can write them in the discussion, and Claudia will either take them immediately or maybe wait for the end of the talk. And of course, at the end of the talk, there will be a time for a discussion with written or spoken questions. So Claudia, please, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, thanks everyone for being here. I'm excited to tell you about this project today that we've been doing at Argus Data Insights. So I'm an NLP software engineer and scientist at Argus Data Insights. And for those of you who don't know the company, so we're a media monitoring company. We're based in Zurich as well as in Germany, in Berlin. We're the leading media analysis and media monitoring company in this region, which means, and what we do basically is for our clients, we monitor all the web, the print newspapers, as well as social media and even YouTube and TV, for example, and radio. And usually clients are interested in finding out what the media says about themselves, but they might also be interested in just general topics like what's being said in the media about chocolate in Switzerland or something like that. And so we monitor all this media for them and basically tell them or give them all the mentions of themselves or whatever topic they're interested in the media. In addition, we also provide or offer media analytics. So like, for example, we check how positive or negative the mentions are. We also provide other media services like translation of articles, as well as, for example, media contact databases. So really everything that's around media monitoring, analytics, insights. And as you can imagine, there is loads of scope for NLP here because all we do is or most of what we do is with text. And the project I'm going to tell you about today is concerned with basically all the articles we collect in one day. And I can tell you there are a lot of articles. So per day, we have like 10 to 20,000 articles. And this is just print and web, not worldwide. This is the Swiss media that we're talking about here. And every newspaper publishes loads of different articles. And what we're interested in is to find out across all the different newspapers and web also newspapers, what are the top headlines or top topics basically of the day. So what are the topics that all the different news outlets are talking about? To start off this project, usually what I like to do is, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. So I generally start off by checking like what's already out there. What off-the-shelf algorithms could I use? And it turns out for clustering and topic modeling, there are quite a few algorithms out there. Some of you might already be familiar with some of them. So for example, there is an algorithm called bird topic that you can see on the website, allows you to find clusters that have easily interpretable topics. The way BERT topic works is, as the name suggests, it uses the BERT model to encode the documents. And then it does some dimensionality reduction. And as a clustering algorithm, it applies HTTP scan. And then it does some further processing with, for example, TF-IDF to basically find the main words that describe a cluster. So this is BERT topic. There is another one that's called top-to-vec, which is very similar, but instead of using BERT, it uses doc-to-vec embeddings of the articles. And the third algorithm that I want to mention is Caret2. Again, this is an algorithm that's meant to discover groups of related documents out of a big collection. So I thought, wow, there are quite a few algorithms out there. They can probably do what I'm trying to do. Here's the result of one of the two of the top 5 clusters when you apply top-to-vec. So the first one has the main words in the clusters that describe the clusters best is various variations of the word me and my. So not particularly useful as a hot topic or the main topic of the day. And the second cluster we can see here is basically words that just describe who published an article, the publisher, the writer, and so on. So again, it's not particularly useful as a top topic of the day. And similarly, if we look at the outcome of carat 2, so we see here there is Donald Trump that looks promising as a topic, but then we have 2 years, last year's, new year as topics. So again, not particularly useful. And I should also say it's not just these abstractions of the clusters that are not particularly useful. It's also, if you look at the articles contained in the clusters that these algorithms find, they are not particularly, as in they're not particularly similar. If I look at them, they basically talk about loads of different topics and not about the same topics. So unfortunately, I couldn't use any off-the-shelf algorithms, but I had to come up with my own pipeline. And just to mention some of the challenges, I already mentioned, of course, there are a lot of texts. So as I said, like 10, 20,000, depending on the day. So the algorithm needs to be relatively fast. Then the text length, as we're here dealing with newspaper articles, they can be quite long. So I said earlier, there's BERT topic, and as you probably know, BERT has the restriction of 512 tokens. This is quite problematic if you work with newspaper articles, because most newspaper articles are longer than that, so BERT can't actually encode it very well. And then in general, I guess the articles are not super uniform. They, depending on the newspaper, they come in different forms and styles and length. So this is something to keep in mind. So to come to the pipeline we developed. I mean, the steps involved are kind of similar to the existing algorithms. First, you need to encode the articles in some way, then you need to apply some kind of clustering algorithm, and then you do some further processing to determine the actual topics of the clusters you found. So I experimented with various different encodings, and I tried BERT, for example, and Doc2Vec, but it turns out that the good old TF-IDF is actually the best encoding you can choose. And the advantage is not just that it works well, but also TF-IDF is language independent. So most of the articles we have are German, but if you encode texts using TF-IDF, you can apply exactly the same pipeline to a set of German texts, a set of French texts, a set of Italian texts. It doesn't matter. You can apply it as is, as long as you have only texts of one language. And the other advantage of TF-IDF is it's super fast, and you don't need resources like a GPU that you might need when you're applying BERT-style models. So using the embeddings produced by TF-IDF, the next step is the clustering. And here again, I use something very similar to the existing algorithms, namely dbScan. I also experimented with quite a few other algorithms like the classic k-means, for example. Optics is another one. There are quite a few, but dbScan actually gives the best clusters. One thing to be aware of is, as with any algorithm, there are of course parameters, and interesting here is the threshold you need to set that determines basically how similar articles need to be in order to be to be counted as one belonging to the same cluster. And that threshold needs to be adjusted dynamically depending on how many articles you have. And this is quite important because depending on the day, we have more or less articles. So we have days with only 5,000 articles, and we also have days with up to 20,000 articles. And if you have a day with only 5,000 articles, you then need to set the threshold higher, whereas you need a lower threshold if you have a lot of articles. And then given the clusters, as I said, the last step is to figure out what the main topic of the cluster is. Like you have clusters of like hundreds, sometimes hundreds of articles. And Again, I experimented with various different algorithms. I tried various abstractive summarization techniques, for example. There are really cool neural models out there to do that, and some of them work very well, but sometimes they produce utter rubbish. So if you really want something more reliable, extractive summarization techniques seem better for this purpose. And here I chose LexRank, which is an extractive summarization technique. And again, this is a very fast algorithm that can just be used off the shelf. And it's applied just on the titles of the articles. So basically, LexRank finds the title that's kind of most representative of all the titles of articles in the cluster. And that's how we get our clusters, basically. One thing I didn't mention yet, it's probably obvious to those of you who work hands-on in NLP, is there's of course a lot of data filtering and data cleaning involved at the start, because we use TF-IDF, it can be easily fooled, let's say. So for example, if we have various articles, web articles that still contain footers of the website, then we sometimes get clusters with all articles that have the same footer, which is of course not what we want. So that all needs to be cleaned. There's also filtering going on, for example, to filter out stock news or stock updates, because otherwise we receive clusters with all stock updates, which again is not what we're interested in. Same with mass schedules. We had like various clusters with just mass schedules. So that all needs to be filtered out. And the last thing I want to mention here is, as said before, with TF-IDF, is very good because you can use it with different languages, but you need to have all articles of the same language. It's not so much of a problem for us because most articles we monitor are German, but we also do have, because we're in Switzerland, we do have various French, Italian and English articles. And the best method that seemed to be working best here was to simply translate those articles into German and then apply the pipeline as is. And again, I'm using some open source models here. I'm using the Opus Machine Translation models, and they work perfectly fine for this scenario. And this is basically what the outcome is. Those are the clusters from yesterday. We can see there is the meeting of the NATO with Biden, and soon there's going to be the meeting with the Russians. And then the second cluster is about the new government in Israel. Then we have a sports cluster about tennis. There's always a lot of sports articles in Switzerland. I should mention that. And the fact that London or the UK has just announced that they're not lifting restrictions, that they're delaying it. And then this again is a Swiss one, that the FDP president is resigning. But so especially for those of you in Switzerland, you've probably heard of all these news yesterday. So yeah, you can see this really gives you the most covered news of the day. And we can do that not just for one day, but if you're interested in, for example, how a topic in the news develops over time, you can do the same thing, say for a week. So instead of taking all articles for one day, you take it all articles of 1 week, and then you can track how the clusters develop over time, which can be very interesting if you want to do further analytics of the different topics. I also wanted to mention something about evaluation. So usually I'm a big fan of course, of presenting quantitative evaluation, presenting some F1 scores, some accuracy scores, whatever is suitable. This was quite difficult to do here because, as I said, we have like 5,000 to 20,000 articles per day, and I couldn't sit down and do that manually to decide the clusters. Nor could anyone else in Argus Data Insights. So instead, what we did was a more qualitative analysis. So we actually sat down and just wrote down ourselves what we thought were probably the top topics of the day by reading through in a few news outlets. And then I basically tried loads of different combinations of algorithms and parameters, noted down all the clusters, looked at the clusters, at least the first 5 to 10 clusters, checked whether the articles within one cluster actually basically had the same topic or were talking about the same things. And basically using this qualitative evaluation, we then figured out what the best combination of parameters and algorithms was. Right, with that, I'm basically already at the end. I just wanted to summarize some lessons learned from this project. First one is don't just throw BERT at everything. I'm a big fan of BERT as well. It's very useful for a lot of problems, but don't forget the good old NLP methods, because they can save you a lot of resources and for some applications might work just as well. Regarding off-the-shelf algorithms, as I said before, it's always useful to try off-the-shelf algorithms, see if you can apply them as is. Often what I found is you can only use them as building blocks and you still need to do some extra work yourself, because that it's rarely the case that an off-the-shelf algorithm works one-to-one for the problem you're trying to solve. And then, of course, and most of you will know that, don't underestimate the impact of data processing and data cleaning. Still now, sometimes we get very strange clusters if, for example, in web articles, suddenly a footer is included, as I mentioned before, that really affects the algorithm a lot. And with that, I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Claudia. The timing allows us very well to have a short question and answer session. For all the audience, please feel free, turn your cameras on, turn your microphones on, or write questions in the discussion board. So I should say the floor is yours. So we have a question in the discussion. Claudia, do you see it or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, hang on. Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So do you scrape the articles or do you have contracts with the media outlets on the input? So I should mention what I presented right now is just for Switzerland. So it's only Swiss articles. And there are slightly different in the rest of Europe. So for the print media, we have, we do have some contracts with the media, and with web outlets, we crawl a lot of websites. I don't want to say anything wrong here because it's not, I'm not the legal expert on whether we also have contracts with them or whether it's allowed in Switzerland to do it just like this. I believe with web articles, you're allowed to crawl them just like that. But as I said, I'm not 100% certain about that, but we're doing it all according to legal guidance and within the legal bounds.
Yes, okay, actually as a user from time to time of Argus, indeed the copies we receive from the articles are perfectly legal, and we're not allowed to give them further away. So I think the pipeline is very, very solid here. I think there is another question in the discussion.
How do I make sure my clusters are good? Are there any incorrect articles in there? Again, very good question. Actually, the question is how you set your threshold. So right now, the problem is more that sometimes there are articles that should be in the cluster, but they are not. But depending on how you set your threshold for the clustering, you either sometimes get clusters that are too big or you get clusters that are too small. We've now found quite a good way of, as I said, dynamically adjusting it, but it will not work 100%. So you'll always get some clusters where one or two articles are missing. And a big problem is actually articles that mention various topics. So sometimes you have articles by, say, SRF or some big news outlet that basically summarize what has happened yesterday. And so they mention all topics, and that can really basically confuse the clustering algorithm, because then it can happen that if this article summarizing everything is contained in one of the clusters, it easily happens that you suddenly have all the topics in one cluster because of this one article that mentions all the topics. And therefore, right now, the threshold that we use is more conservative to make sure that we really only get one topic per cluster.
Hi there. Sorry, that was actually my question that you answered there. Based on that, I also have this issue with the police, or let's say all the police reports that there are, because we also do something similar at work, and police reports are written very similarly. Like there's a place, there's a crime, and there is a time when it happened, and all our police reports get clustered together. But then there is another article or another document which kind of refers to that that crime that happened. So maybe the canton mentioned something about an accident, and then there are like some police reports about the same accident. But all the police reports are clustered together, and then the canton report, which is, let's say, from DBScan point of view, a bit further away. Have you found a solution to solve that?
So one thing, so one thing I've tried is to basically do a second clustering after the first one, which I think is quite a promising approach, but I haven't finished the experiments yet. That's why it's not included here. But what you can try is basically, what I've tried is take one cluster and take all the articles that haven't been clustered, and this set I cluster again with an adjusted threshold, and that helps to get articles that haven't been included in the cluster but should be included in the cluster. That only works if the article you're interested in is in the no cluster kind of pile of DBScan. If it's in a different cluster, then I think it's very difficult to then take different clusters and correct them later on. That's close to impossible, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so there is one question pending, and actually we have 5 extra minutes so that we get in sync with the other sessions, I was told. So it's perfectly fine. We have time for this other question in the chat, please.
Yeah, multilingual bird. No, I didn't actually try multilingual bird. The main reason being this 512 token limit, which is quite limiting for newspaper articles. So yeah, in this application, I didn't actually try that because TF-IDF worked so well. Whereas so just looking at one language, BERT didn't work so well for the clustering, and TF-IDF worked very well for the clustering. That's why straight away I went with an approach with this translation approach, rather than with the approach of doing BERT again, but multilingual. But I guess it's something that I could try in the future to see how well it works. And of course, I'm also aware that there are like more advanced BERT models these days, like the longformer, that can actually deal with longer sequences. So it's not impossible to apply, of course.
Claudia, just one question that is related to that. Did you observe that you have also linguistic specific clusters that emerge in your information system?
Yeah. So that did happen at the start, and that's why we basically solved that through filtering and data processing. Oh, you meant, sorry, with linguistic, did you mean language specific, or did you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for the regions, let's say Swiss regions.
No. So I guess also all the articles we have, none of them are in Swiss German. They are all High German. But the clustering across the languages actually works really well with the translations. So I actually obtained clusters that have articles that were originally in French and in Italian and in English and in German, all in one cluster.
Okay, so thank you. Quite a lot of questions, and I'm sure we could continue for some time, because it's something that well, I think we all understand also the end use and the goal of such clustering. But I think it would be fair to stop here, given the time that was given to us. So thank you very much once again.